All right, guys, this is my 2017 Chevy Silverado 1500. It's got 216,000 miles on it. It's kind of my project truck. I just got it a few months ago. I've only put a few hundred miles on it. Suspension needs to be updated, refreshed, replaced. Here's kind of a pile of parts that I'm replacing here. Shocks, upper and lower control arms, sway bar, link bushings, brake pads, rotors. I'm doing the bearing assembly, tie rod end. So kind of a whole refresh of the suspension. So I've got all my tools out, getting ready to go here. So this is just kind of a process of what's involved. All right, with the wheel off, we got it on jack stands. We're just gonna take the brake caliper off first. 19 millimeter off of the bracket. 19 millimeter for the caliper. The caliper bracket, 18 millimeters right there. We'll hang up and support the caliper, take the bracket off. T30 to get the rotor off. This is a 35 millimeter. We'll take this axle nut off. 10 millimeter bolt to get this bracket off here, and 10 millimeter to get this off. There's like an ABS or speed sensor inside the hub bearing we're gonna take off, so I just need to disconnect that. Rotors, caliper, everything's off there. We can start undoing our sway bar end link, and then gonna get this front knuckle off. This is an 18 millimeter here. Ball joint for the control arm, that's a 24 millimeter. We're just gonna get that off. It should be 21 millimeter for the tie rod end. And we'll start loosening the strut tower, 18 millimeter there. Extremely helpful to have one of these ratcheting, swiveling head, long wrenches to get these top bolts up there. Like a little sledgehammer, you pound on the knuckle right here, that'll pop this upper ball joint out. Now we just gotta loosen the bottom one, 24 millimeter nut. And then I'm gonna use a pickle fork to try to separate that. All right, sway bar end links is 15 millimeter, got those off. 15 millimeter, the bolts that hold the strut onto the lower control arm, those are off, those are 15 millimeter. Now I'm just working on the lower control arm. I'm gonna get my pickle fork in there and try to pop that ball joint out so that I can then just take the whole knuckle off, and then I can take these 3 bolts off, replace the hub. So what I decided to do, I'm just gonna take the entire lower control arm off. That way I can, with the control arm out of the truck, I can beat on the bottom of this. It's hard to like get this to pop up when there's all this weight resting on it. So 24 millimeter nut on the end of the lower control arms, one there. You do have to take this bracket off, sway bar bracket, 10 millimeter bracket there, 2 bolts, just drop that down, and then you can pull the bolt out. And so once I have that out, it'll make all of this a lot easier because this will all come out of the truck. So I got the lower control arm out. The nut is a 24 millimeter, and then it's an 18 bolt. So once you get those out, I was then able to pound the axle out. So I have the knuckle, the bearing assembly. So now it's gonna be easier to get this bearing assembly off. It's got these, I think these are 15 millimeters back behind here, 3 of those. Gets the whole hub out. And then I can pound this ball joint out at the bottom of the knuckle because this is really hard to get out. All right, you take out these 3 bolts behind the back of the knuckle. It drops out the hub assembly, so we'll reuse these, but we're gonna replace the hub bearing assembly. Now we just need to knock out this lower ball joint off the knuckle. And I'm also doing the tie rod end steering linkage. All right, we're sticking the pickle fork down in there, pounding on the top of that ball joint, finally popped loose. This thing's a bugger to get loose. I'm not saving the control arm. The only thing I'm keeping is the knuckle, so it doesn't matter if I destroyed the ball joint or even bent the control arm. So we can get the knuckle cleaned up, start working on the other parts. So just getting ready to take off the upper control arm. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get a paint pen, and I'm just gonna mark on the frame and this washer part on each side. So 4 spots, right across here, right across here, here and here, just so I can line these back up when I put it back in. This is how the alignment is corrected with these adjustment type washers here on the inside and outside. So take off the bolts take off the control arm, and then we're gonna replace this whole tie rod end steering shaft. So the nut and bolt to get off the upper control arm is gonna be 21 millimeters on both sides. So once we get those out, we can just pull this out. The new upper control arms that I'm using are these ones. They're made for a 2 to 4 inch lift, so it's going to help keep the geometry a little better than the stock one, since I'm lifting at 2.5 inches in the front. The bolts put back. So I'm working on the tie rod end. To get this off here, I got to remove the boot. There's a little clamp. It's actually crimped on. You have to just break it off. So I got that off. Pulled the boot back, and that exposes this is kind of like a big nut right here. I'm just going to use a big open-ended adjustable wrench to wrench that off, and then the whole tie rod end steering linkage will come off, and I can put the new one on. Tie rod end off, along with this shaft right here. You can see how it just screws on the end, and there's some notches where you can put an adjustable wrench on the side. I'm going to reuse the boot. I can't get this end off, so I'm just going to cut this off with a grinder right here, so I can reuse this boot, this front clip. The second clip on the back is not reusable. It's one of those crimp-on ones. So I'm just going to use a regular hose clamp to keep that tightened up. All right, before I put the new tie rod in together, I want to measure the last one, the old one I just cut. You see is right here. Up my new one. So with our tie rod end all replaced, we got our upper control arm. Now I'm going to do the lower control arm before I do the strut, just because the strut is larger than the factory one that I'm doing. And it's just going to be easier to do the bottom control arm first. Put the bolts back in on this one, bolt it down. So the strut I'm using is this Rough Country 2.5 inch strut. The strut itself gives it 2 inches, and then there's a little plate on top that gives it another 1/2 inch. So I'm gonna get this into position. You're gonna lift this control arm up, slot these bolts in tight, and just kind of lightly get it started. All right, the strut is in, the lower bolts in. To get the lower bolts into the control arm, you have to leave this top kind of loose. So make sure that's nice and loose. And then I've got a floor jack underneath this lower control arm to lift it up to meet up with the strut. So that's all done. Now we just need to get the knuckle prepared. I'm going to get the new bearing into the knuckle, and then we'll be able to mount this up here. Put the axle in, lower ball joint, upper ball joint. On these Rough Country shocks, these are a 15 millimeter below, but they're 14 up top here. It's kind of weird. The rear is currently at stock level. I have it lifted up on jack stands, and I want to show you how to install, or what I'm doing to install these new shocks and U-bolts and blocks in the rear. So here's what this isn't a kit. I just bought these separately. These are the new shocks. These will accommodate a little bit larger of a lift. And then it comes with these 2 blocks. These blocks are going to replace the factory block under the leaf spring. This gives it about 1 inch. So this is about 1 inch higher than the factory block. That will be replaced, and then we will replace the U-bolts underneath it. This is pretty simple. You just need to get it elevated. I have the wheels elevated a couple inches off the ground. I've got 2 jack stands under the frame on each side. I have a jack stand under the drive shaft axle area. And then you want to be able to have like a jack or something underneath the diff that you can lift up and down, because once we get the U-bolts loosened, we'll want to lower the diff down a little bit so that we can create some room to take out the block and put this new block in. So we're gonna get these U-bolts out. But first, let's get the shocks taken out. So underneath here, there's just two shocks. There's one behind the axle, and then on this side, there's one in front of the axle. I already got that side off. Let me give you just a couple tips here. It's a 21 millimeter bolt with 20 millimeter nut. So just an open-ended wrench, and I'm using an impact wrench. So you just need a 21 millimeter socket and a wrench. Zip that off. And then up above here, there's the mount. You can see the screw all the way up there. Now the nice thing is the nut. So the nut's on this side, the bolt goes in this side. The nut is welded on. So all you have to do is just put your ratchet or impact wrench right in here, 21 millimeter, and zip that bolt out, and then the shock will be able to come down. So with the shock out, that came out very easily. Just have safety glasses on because all kinds of dirt and debris is gonna fall down from there as you're looking up there. So I'm actually gonna wait to put the new ones on because I need to lower down the diff once I take off these. So these U-bolt screw nuts right here, I'm gonna take these off on each side. So 4 on that side, 4 on that side. The axle is gonna be supported with the jack. And once I get these off, I'll be able to see this. This is the existing block right there. I'll be able to slip that off as I lower the jack down a little bit. And I need to not have the shocks on here preventing it from going down. So I'll put those on after I get the blocks replaced. The nuts off, just remove these old U-bolts. The U-bolts are getting replaced. This carrier on the bottom is going to get reused. All right, with the U-bolts out, the axle is now floating. I have it on my, you can see my jack here. I just lowered my floor jack down just a little bit just to be able to get these old blocks out. So we take out the block. That's the existing block. And now we put in the new lifting block. Now there's a slight slope to it. It slopes, as you can see, it's kind of like wedge shape. The lower part, the slope faces forward, so we want to make sure we get that. So moving on to the shocks, the upper shock mount just up here, just a bolt through, and then we can just put our 21 millimeter impact and just tighten that down. And then we'll be able to move this down to the position here. I'm just gonna cut this wire off of it. It'll extend down and I'll be able to position into place here, put the 21 millimeter bolt and nut on there and secure that down, and just do the same to both sides. With the shock placed up here, I cut the wire, it extended down to here, and I was able just to push up just a little bit and pound this screw in right here. So I can just torque that down. All right, everything's finished on this. I've got the shocks all bolted down, the U-bolts torqued down. Be interesting to see kind of how it feels on the road. All right, I'm gonna run this over to the alignment shop and see if they can get this thing aligned for me. All right, guys, so I got it back from the shop. I got an alignment done. The alignment was really off. I mean, which I expected, because after changing those control arms, the struts, lifting it, the tie rod ends, I mean, all that just really affects the alignment. So now it's really good. I've driven it for about a week now, and it's been really good. So I'll give kind of a follow-up review after this video. Like in another video, just kind of going over like how these shocks feel and everything. But the steering feels great. The suspension feels really good. I mean, it feels like kind of a brand new truck now. So really happy with it. This was a lot of work, but I'm glad that I did it. I think I saved quite a bit by doing this myself, getting all the parts, just kind of working on it. It took me about a week, just kind of working on it here and there over the course of a week. But guys, I'll leave a link to some of the parts and tools that I use in this video. Hopefully you found this interesting or entertaining at least. Hit that thumbs up button, leave any comments down below, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks.